Welcome. Thank you for joining the Pat Sheranian Show. We appreciate you being with us this morning. I have a wonderful guest, and we're going to be talking about American freedom. Good morning, Pam Openshaw.
Good morning.
So good to have you
Well,
here.
thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have heard Pam talk about this particular subject, and she's going to tell you about some of the other people that she has worked with, and you're going to find it interesting. So if you're listening to us on the radio, KHQN 1480, tell your friends because this is going to be an interesting show. If you're near a computer, you can watch us on pat.utahvalleylive.com. And again, we appreciate your being here. Thank you for that. And I need to mention our sponsor, Kyani, Kyani. As you know, these products have changed my life. I was diabetic, had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, crippling arthritis, a mess for about 14 years, really and truly, and no energy whatsoever. And now my life has completely changed. I'm no longer diabetic, no longer high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and my arthritis pain is gone. So I would recommend these to anybody. If you're a walker or a jogger, you want to feel better, then these products will help you feel so good. They give you a boost in energy, clean you up, clear you out, make you healthy. How's that? And that's why I'm here today. So grateful to them. Pam, I know you're into health foods and
very much
so.
Try to take good care of myself.
It really does make a difference what we eat.
Oh my goodness, it really does. And I've tried your product and it's excellent.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're going to jump right into this subject today. Wait, I have one more thing I have to mention. Joy Bischoff, who was on with us on Tuesday or Wednesday this week, on November 5th, I want you to mark this, on November 5th, for $25, you're going to have an opportunity of being with her almost all day long, starting at 8:30 in the morning for registration. The meeting is going to be held in Provo in a private home, so seating is limited, and you do need to get hold of her through the Gmail. So it's understandingnibley@gmail.com, understandingnibley, Nibley, @gmail.com. And let her know that you need a reservation to be there. I think the top limit is 40 people, and she is filling up fast. This is on a Saturday, November 5th. So mark your calendars, get on your computer, and let her know you want to be there. Understandingnibley@gmail.com. She will take you right out into the cosmos. I mean, it's amazing. We're going to talk about her magnet quartz bracelets and anklets and why they work and why you should be wearing them. So with that, let's do American freedom. But before we get right into that subject, Pam, I've been not surprised because you're a student, you read constantly, but amazed at the information I didn't know, or at least I've forgotten. This has to do with the Constitution. If there's ever time in this world when we should understand our Constitution, it is the upcoming year. And if we start now, we might get it right. I think awareness is a key to success in anything. And Pam is here this morning to help us become more aware and to give us some background in history. And we're going to start with her background in history. So tell us about yourself. Where were you born and raised? And you raised some kids and gone on some missions and have done some really interesting. You and your husband are never home. You put around in a cute little car.
Yes, a little Mini Cooper. Oh,
it's
love
just
it.
darling. And you've gotten into this, and I'm not sure when. So bring us all up to date with that.
Well, I was born in Arizona a long time ago. I have always had a patriotic bent because my father left to go to World War II shortly after. Actually, he was in the service when I was born. He went AWOL to come and see me in the hospital, and I didn't see him again until I was 2. My husband was a career Air Force officer, and he was gone for the birth of our 3rd child. Oh, and that 3rd child was in the World Trade Center on 9/11. He survived. We're very grateful for that. And so I've had a lot of opportunities to really renew my patriotic feelings toward my country, and I have very strong feelings about my country. I love it very much. I'm very concerned about the things that are happening right now. My husband and I served an LDS mission to Italy. We were gone during the last presidential election, and our children told us, Mom and Dad, you're coming home to a different country than the one you left. When we got home, we found out that that was true. I set about to find out what was going on, what was happening. And I ended up working with the Thomas Jefferson Center for Constitutional Studies and Restoration. Excellent, excellent organization. So I've been working with their training program, their education program, and then have gone way beyond that. I'm reading everything I can get my hands on that has to do with our country and with patriotism, and I've developed a particular love for the period of time leading up to the time the Constitution was written and ratified. So I've developed a great love of the Founding Fathers.
Well, let's bring it up to where we were this week with what
Okay.
you're talking about, because I happened to catch her. Well, it was yesterday. Yeah, yesterday, and in her home, giving this wonderful overview of really history, wonderful history leading up to the Constitution and beyond, and what are we to look forward to coming up, and what should we be doing to make a difference. So let's start right out with that. Explain how God played such a huge part. You cannot talk about the Constitution with that. Well, I guess you can, but you and I know that God was the basis of everything that happened with that. So with that, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Most people are not aware of the fact that God has had a hand in the development of the Constitution and in the development of freedom and independence in America since the beginning of what we know recorded about this continent. Modern writers, of course, well, those of us who are of the LDS faith know that there's a great deal of information on that in the Book of Mormon, but the Book of Mormon ends at 400 AD, and then there's a gap until Columbus discovered America in 1492, so you have almost 1,100 years there with no recorded information. We don't know what was happening in the Americas at that time, but in 1492 we know that Columbus discovered America, and he believed that he was being led to the Americas by God, that it was his responsibility and his stewardship and indeed his great privilege to bring Jesus Christ to the natives of the far country that he knew as India. And so when he set sail from the Americas, it was with that great intent. He was going to bring the gospel of Christ, knowledge of God, to the Americas. That was the major factor that directed him as he searched for sponsors to pay for his voyages, and as he came to the Americas, that was his drive.
Well, then from there, that little space of time, you want to go back and fill that in, or you want to pick up with
Now
Columbus?
let's start with Columbus and
Okay.
go forward from there,
Because I found that really interesting. We grew up with the Pilgrims and the Indians, but you brought a whole nother dimension to it.
most people are not aware of what happened between the time Columbus discovered America and when the colony of Jamestown was founded in 1607. Actually, during that period of time, there was quite a bit going on, but in a very small sense in the Americas. We had a lot of explorers coming over from Spain and from France. Those were the two main countries that brought explorers to America. But exploration was their second goal. Their first goal was as emissaries of God to convert the Indians to Christianity. So you had the Dominican and the Franciscan friars, and you had the French Jesuit priests coming over and traveling throughout the Americas. They baptized tens of thousands of the Indians to Christ. They developed orphanages, worked with all the people to help relieve the distress of the Indian tribes and the wars that these people would get into and the great animosity that rested between them. Some really phenomenal individuals came forward into the Americas at that time, and as part of their discipline, they kept records. And so we have their journals. So you can go back actually to these records and research what these individuals did. It's a fascinating part of history, and that lasted for probably, well, about 115 years, that process.
We don't know a lot about the Indian tribes that were there, or how many of them, or at least I don't, really became Christians or got involved. You told a cute story about what we call the first Thanksgiving, and how one or two came, and then the next year.
Well, so this happened with the Pilgrims who arrived in the Americas in 1620. They would have starved. Actually, every group that came to the Americas, the colony of Jamestown came in 1607, the Pilgrims came in 1620, the Puritans came in 1630, and those people really had a hard time when they came to the Americas, growing food, adapting to the climate. They had some really high death rates among the people, but the Pilgrims in particular received a lot of Indian help. We all know the stories from when we were in school with Squanto and the like. But as they were able to finally get ahead of the situation and develop enough of a food supply that they thought it would take them through the winter, they wanted to offer thanks to God. And the way that they wanted to do that was to share their very limited bounty with the Indians. And so they invited them to come to the first Thanksgiving. They invited only the chiefs and their immediate families because their food supply was so limited. When the chief showed up, that first year he showed up with, I think it was 70 braves with him, and the Pilgrims were going, oh no, what are we going to do about our food? Fortunately, they had brought some animals that they had killed and prepared, and so they were able to, because of the goodwill that was developed from that, the Indians helped them a lot that winter, and they were able to make it. So the next year they conducted the same feast again under very limited food supply, and this year the king showed up with 200 braves. But it was a wonderful experience, wonderful success. You mentioned the colonies that were developed in the Americas. There's very interesting information about that. There were three primary colonies, as I mentioned, Jamestown, the Pilgrims, and the Puritans, but they came for different purposes. The colony of Jamestown came to the Americas to find gold. It was a venture by an investment group in England. They had put together the individuals to come to the Americas, and they simply forgot to include people who could grow food once they got here. And so there were no farmers and no one really that knew how to cultivate the land. They brought a lot of gentlemen with them, and they brought some artisans with them, and they were all waiting to find the gold that was laying around on the ground in the Americas. And when they arrived in the Americas and saw, first of all, that the gold wasn't laying around on the ground, and secondly, that they were going to have to grow some food, these gentlemen farmers simply refused to participate in that process. They said, we don't work. And so they didn't, and consequently they had really high death rates for well over a decade in Jamestown. And every year the supply ships would come from England, but mostly they would bring new settlers instead of bringing the food that was needed. And so they would get a whole new crop of individuals that would promptly starve to death the next winter. It was a very, very hard time. It was actually
terrible
it
death
was
rate.
it was
Very
there were
sad
some
time.
years they had 80 to 90% of the people die, always at least 50% or more. And it was 20 years before that colony was self-sustaining. But now the Pilgrims and the Puritans both came to find religious freedom and to bring Jesus Christ to the Indians. So they received a lot more divine assistance in what they were doing here in the Americas. They treated the Indians differently. They went about the whole process differently. When they ran into difficulty, they would hold a day of fasting, and they would examine themselves to see, what am I doing that is preventing the Spirit from being able to work through me? And they would then bring about the blessings of God upon them. And so they were able to reach a point where they were self-sustaining much faster.
Because we are live on radio, KHQN 1480, and also pat.com, Utah Valley Live. No, pat.utahvalleylive.com. We have a chat room that you're welcome to enter. And Pam, if you'll turn and look at the monitor, somebody has sent you a message. It says, we love you, Pam, you go girl.
Well, thank you.
That sounds a lot like Jan Hilton.
It does.
So thank you for that. And again, if you would like to hear us on the radio, it's on 1480 AM. If you're near a computer, and turn it on. If you're listening to the radio, turn on your computer too. And then you get to see us and work with us, pat.utahvalleylive.com. During that period of time, there were still wars going on. People were starving to death. Did the Indians go into the background? Did they become Christians? It's really quite sketchy, and it has been. I think back, I don't remember anybody even talking about missionaries or converting anyone. We talked about them sitting around a table and they're called pilgrims. The ones in black and white, the others in black and white, and there's a turkey. So we didn't have a lot of history
No, we don't.
about the
Hasn't been
Indians and
told.
what happened to them at
Well,
that time. And so if you have that information, of course, all of this is leading up to what's going to come.
freedom in the Americas, yes. This is all a part of the process that prepared the colonists, that gave them the desire and the thirst for freedom, but also that prepared them to be able to ask for that and then proceed into a war where they would demand that they receive their freedom. It was interesting that each of these colonies, the Pilgrims and the Puritans, both of them came to the Americas to bring Christ to the Indians, and they converted people sometimes by the tens of thousands.
Oh.
Very interesting process. There were a lot of the Native Americans that were being converted. But over a period of time, now you remember that I stated that the Puritans came, well, I didn't state that, so let me state it now. They came as a covenant people. They accepted this as their responsibility. They came as a covenant people, and their covenant was to bring Christ to the Indians. But they began to drift over a period of time as they became prosperous after, it was a period of time, 15, 20 years, but they had then reached the point where they had their own lands, and they had their animals and all of the trappings of prosperity. And when they did, they began to turn away from these principles of Puritanism, and the younger generation basically wasn't participating, and their ministers were warning them. They were saying, remember that we came here for a purpose. We came here to be a covenant people, and they're trying to call them back to repentance, and the people simply were not responding. And so
history repeats and repeats and repeats along that same
Well,
line
it
from
does.
the beginning of time.
It really does.
So did they turn? Where was the turn?
Well, so if you take a look at prior history of the Americas, you know that when people turned from righteousness, the Indians came upon them, and that is precisely what happened with the Puritans. There was a massive Indian uprising in the late 1600s. The Indians gathered together in a confederation, and almost every Indian tribe in New England gathered together, realizing that these colonists that were coming to the Americas were driving them out of their land and replacing their way of life. And they were determined to make an all-out effort to eliminate these people from their land. And so they struck out in a massive Indian uprising, massacred a lot of settlements. It went on for a period of over a year. Major problems, some real brutality.
So
going
this
on
would
there.
have been some generations from those that were working
A couple,
a couple of generations away.
about two generations.
That caused the havoc because they had been working together.
They
were poor together. They worked together for prosperity.
And because they were poor, they were humble.
Right.
There's some interesting stories that come out of that. Let me give you some information about one of them. There was a woman by the name of Mary Rowlandson, and she was one of the Puritans during this period of time. When the Indian uprisings began, the Puritan colonies quickly threw together houses of safety, houses of refuge, and they would build these large log structures so that they could protect the windows and everything.
Would we call that a compound?
Yeah.
A compound?
Actually, it was more just of a building,
Oh,
a
okay.
fort. Yeah, a fort, but it was an enclosed kind of thing, not what you would picture in the old American West. Anyway, so when the Indians came upon her community of Lancaster, she and her children, the husband was away at the time, but she and her children ran into this structure. The Indians set fire to the structure, and so those that were inside had to either run outside and face the Indian arrows and the Indian guns, or they had to stay inside and burn. So she, holding her infant child in her arms, she rushed from the structure along with her children. She was struck several times by Indian arrows, and they captured her and took her prisoner along with the baby. So she spent 9 days trekking with the Indians through the snow, sleeping on nothing but branches laid on the ground for that 9-day period of time. And then her baby died. And she continued to be held captive until she had been with the Indians for 11 weeks and 5 days, at which time the Indian uprising was just about to resolve itself, and she was freed to discover that her husband and her son and daughter were both safe. But now it's interesting why that Indian uprising resolved itself. The Puritans pulled themselves together and they analyzed their behavior, each one of them in their own individual way. How am I responding in terms of the covenant that I have made and the responsibility that we had when we came to the Americas? And they really began to repent. They held days of fasting. They began to really work with their own individual repentance and believed, their leaders believed and the common people believed that this was why the Indian uprising resolved itself, was because the people returned to a greater righteousness. Again, it's that spirit of righteousness operating to bring about freedom in the Americas.
I'm speaking this morning with Pam Openshaw. She's my guest, and I'm so grateful to have her here. And she's so knowledgeable, so thank you for being with us. I would like to give out a phone number for the Thomas Jefferson Center, and so that if you want questions to ask her later, or you want to know more about it, we're going to give you some information, how you can get involved in knowing more about the Constitution and what's coming. So let's start giving that out, and then we'll repeat it 2 or 3 more times.
Well, the Thomas Jefferson Center contact point would be Dan Vance, and his telephone number is 801-513-5045.
Let's give it again.
801-513-5045.
Okay, and Dan can answer your questions. And then do you have anything coming up that would be interesting?
We do.
That people can come to? I know that I went to a meeting. I'm trying to think of who Skousen was there. Can't remember who was there.
Dr. probably
Dr.
Glenn Kimber.
Maybe it's Glenn Kimber.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you had some DVDs or CDs for sale.
We did. Uh-huh.
And do you still have those available?
We do. We'll have those up on our website within probably about the next week, but you could contact Dan Vance at that telephone number, or you can also go to thomasjeffersoncenter.com. Or you can go to Dan at thomasjeffersoncenter.com. We have some absolutely fascinating materials. And the Thomas Jefferson Center, the actual name of the organization is the Thomas Jefferson Center for Constitutional Restoration. And it is our objective to restore the Constitution to its original form. Now, a lot of people are not aware, Pat, of why this is so important. The Constitution has been altered dramatically. Our system of checks and balances has been taken away from the Constitution. Income tax was introduced, which was never intended by the Founding Fathers to be part of our culture and our civilization. So a lot of things have happened, and those are only a few of the things that have happened to dilute and actually alter the Constitution. It's our objective to restore it to its original form. And in order to do that, one of the major things that we do is that we teach education seminars. We teach a 16-week course called The Healing of America. It's a fascinating course.
When's that going to start again? Because
it's actually started right now,
Okay.
but you can step into it any place in the 16-week cycle. You don't have to start at the beginning.
Is there a cost?
Yes, the cost is $39 for each 4-week segment.
Okay.
There are 4-week segments. The first segment is on the Founding Fathers and what it went into bringing about the Constitution. The second 4 weeks is on the Constitution itself, and we go through it in detail and we explain what the Constitution is.
Do we know where this is held?
There are 3 sessions in progress right now, one in Layton, one in Bountiful, and one in Lehigh, and that information will be available at thomasjeffersoncenter.com.
Right. Or, again, they can talk to Dan.
Or, again, they can call
Let's give that phone
Dan,
one
and
more
that
time.
telephone number is 801-513-5045. thomasjeffersoncenter.com. Now, of the 4 seminars, I mentioned the first 2. The third one is The Enemies of the Constitution, and that will come as a real surprise to people. We actually identify how we came about this whole process of slipping into socialism. We identify that in that 3rd seminar. And then the 4th seminar identifies what to do about it. So it's a very comprehensive seminar, very powerful, taught by a live individual. Each seminar is 2 to 2.5 hours long. We give you good, in-depth information. Wonderful series.
I'm working with Pam right now to see if we can't get more involved with the Thomas Jefferson Center and bring it at some point, part or as much as possible, in a series on both KHQN and on pat.utahvalleylive.com, because I think more people want to be involved. They don't know where to go. They don't know where to go. So this is a start. So Leighton, and so if they call Dan, they can get addresses for all of this right now, and then eventually it's going to be on your website.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I would really encourage people to take that class is that we have a lot of people out there doing a lot of things to try and help with the circumstances as they are right now. A lot of people are doing exactly the wrong thing. In fact, often the solutions that we see being proposed are as unconstitutional as the things they're trying to replace. If we don't know what we're doing and we don't get on the right track here, we're just going to create more problems down the line. We'll solve the old problem, but we'll create the new problem.
Ones. So I'm hearing you say get it right the first time and get involved.
Exactly.
So share this with your friends, share the information, and because these are rotating, if they miss the first block of 4 weeks, then they can pick up the second block, or you just come in at any time.
Exactly.
Because they're going to keep going.
Yes, you can step into the process. You will probably, it's not that the Lehigh series starts and goes 16 weeks and then starts over again, although they may very well start doing that. But there are other seminars offered, and you can always pick up what you missed. Much better to step into it where you are right now today and learn what you need to learn. And then it all fits together. It all fits together in your mind. The entire series is designed such that you can step into it in the middle.
And it's worth going. It's entertaining. You are not going to go to sleep in this one.
And not only that, but the price on this
is crazy low.
Oh my gosh, you're going to pay $156 for some information about the Constitution that a lot of our representatives who are in government don't even know. I mean, you are going to know a lot when you finish the seminar. Very interesting. It's a fun and interesting thing to do.
It's amazing that when we have network marketing products going on, we can get 2,000 people in a room to learn about them, and we can't get 200 in a room to learn about the Constitution.
But we're working on that.
And we're going to get there, and that's why we're on the air today. And so let's go back, because I did have a couple of questions, and we're going to pick up and tie this all together at the end about what's coming in the future and what has led up to it. There were some really interesting people, men in particular, that came out of the colonies.
They were.
And let's talk about what happened, because as we begin to see the hand of the Lord truly in all of this, and how certain men have come forth, certain people came forth to begin the groundwork.
They were. That's a good point.
Okay.
You have very strong leaders emerging from both the Puritans and the Pilgrims. You have Governor John Winthrop under the Puritans. There was also a group that broke off from there, led by Robert Hooker, who went on to settle Connecticut and actually write what would be the very first of the constitutions. He was very influential in helping the different states or the different colonies develop their own constitutions, and also he was influential in directing some of the thoughts of the founding fathers. So you have that. You have William Bradford emerging with the Pilgrims. These individuals were very powerful leaders, all of them taking their own steps to bring about the concept of the people choosing their leaders and the power of government resting within the people. And that, of course, was what, and God, of course, leading that process. And that was what led to the Constitution of the United States. Very powerful.
So starting
leaders.
right there. So, okay, and then what happened to these? You told a few stories about some of the tragedies that happened to a few of them, and some of their history. But if they're laying the groundwork, where did it then move? Where did you go with it from there?
Well, the
The colonies, the
we've
dedication
seen
to
this.
God.
Yeah,
Okay.
we've seen this whole process take place. You know, the people are humble when they're struggling, and then they develop prosperity, and then they kind of drift away from it. And that began to happen again, even after this Indian uprising. This drift began to occur again, and then we have what emerged on the scene in the Americas, what is known as the Great Awakening.
There you go.
Absolutely fascinating. I was telling you about that yesterday, Pat.
Right.
Just a fascinating thing. It began with a man by the name of George Whitefield. Well, no, it didn't begin with him. That's not totally accurate. It began actually in a small village in Pennsylvania. No, I believe it was Massachusetts, with a reverend in one particular small community. He noticed that an outpouring of the Spirit of God just came upon the people in this community. People who had not been attending church began to come. People who had been sinning began to repent, and it was a powerful thing. The Spirit just poured out among these people, and then it began spreading to other communities. And some of the individuals that were involved in this ended up going back to England and came into contact with this man named George Whitefield, and he began to grasp the spirit of this great Reformation movement. There wasn't any event that started this. It was just simply a miraculous outpouring of the Spirit that came upon the people.
Would we say they were moved by the Spirit?
Absolutely, but it was a powerful experience, a pouring out experience. So George Whitefield eventually worked with some of the people there in England, and then came to the Americas and began to spread the gospel of Christ among the people in the colonies. And he actually taught for 33 years here in the Americas. He was a preacher going from one place to another, speaking from anywhere from 2 to 4 hours at a time, traveling from community to community, and everywhere he went, a revival began, and the people just began to talk of Christ. And you could walk down the streets of villages and you could hear psalms and the singing of hymns coming from their homes. It was amazing. The people caught such fire over this that he developed a great reputation, but remained a very, very humble man all throughout his life. And when he was coming to a community, men would climb on their horses and go riding down the country roads, calling to all of the people, "George Whitefield is coming, George Whitefield is coming." And the farmers would leave their plows in the middle of the fields. The merchants and the mechanics would shut up their shops, gather their families together, and they would all go to hear George Whitefield, and they would arrive by thousands. Sometimes, and one witness stated that as the people were coming into the community to hear George Whitefield, they kicked up such a cloud of dust that the sky was filled with dust from all these people coming on their horses and in their carriages. He became friends with Benjamin Franklin, and of course, with Franklin's bent toward science, he did some experiments with this and determined that George Whitefield's voice could be heard in a crowd of 30,000 people, and he actually taught groups as large as 30,000 people at a time. But
for that time,
yes,
that was amazing.
Yes,
and considering they didn't have anything,
no
not
voice
a single
amplification,
electronic thing.
No way to do that. He served a very, very important part in preparing the people of the American colonies to demand their independence, and to do so from the perspective and from the belief within their hearts that this was what God wanted for them. Because he taught the colonists, he brought a unity among the colonists, not a political unity, but a spiritual unity among these people. And also a part of what he was doing was act on what you're doing. And that prepared the colonists then to take action on these feelings and drives and this love that was coming to them of freedom.
What was he preaching? We say the gospel, but did he bring a Baptist bent to this country? Did he bring Episcopalian, Catholic?
None.
He wanted to
He preached God.
Just preach God.
He preached God.
Was he using a Bible, or do we know?
Yes, he used the Bible, but he preached for no particular denomination, and he didn't leave behind him any church organization that was supposed to be functioning. He was drawing them to their own individual congregations, but he was just renewing in them a desire to know Jesus Christ and to follow him.
I know this is jumping ahead, but you said something right at the end of yesterday, right about that subject, that we've got to do that now.
Oh my goodness, yes.
We've got to start calling on our communities and our country
Mm-hmm.
to become
Yeah.
more Christ-like and to create the kind of foundation that they were in the process of creating when the Constitution was written. So I know you've got a lot of notes, and we've got plenty of time. So you can tell and share some of those stories if you want, or we can go to the about some of the events of the war for independence.
Oh,
And go there and talk about that
okay.
a little bit.
All right. Let me just leave you with one last quote about this great awakening, because Pat asked the question, and it's a very good question. Can this happen again? Absolutely, this can happen again. This is what those of us in the Thomas Jefferson Center are working toward. This is what we're praying for. This is what we're encouraging other people to join us in, is to ask for this great awakening. Now, one of the books that I would like to recommend to you is a book called The Light of the Glory by Peter Marshall and David Manuel.
I'm going to ask you to move yourself over just a
Oh,
little
okay,
bit.
just right there.
Yeah, in front
Not
of this mic a
carrying
little
too well.
bit.
Okay.
Okay.
So the book is The Light and the Glory by Peter Marshall and David Manuel, and I want to read you a quote from that book because they were the ones that made me aware of this process of the Great Awakening. This is what they said. What was this Great Awakening? It was a deep awakening of a national desire to live a covenant life. It is a hunger so deeply ingrained in the American national psyche that it can never die, though it can go fast asleep. God reawakened that desire in the 1740s, and what he reawakened once, he can reawaken again.
And certainly the time has never been more important than it is now.
Never.
Next year is going to be a turning event for our country, for each of us. And I'm speaking with Pam Openshaw. She's my guest and friend and neighbor. She has spent a lifetime doing what many of us have not done, and that's learning about the Constitution and the American covenant that we have. And can you, if you would, talk a little bit more about that covenant? We kind of went by it. But when Columbus came here, he had an intent. But now we think of covenants from an LDS standpoint. And have we covenanted, do you believe, before we came here? Because we believe in a pre-existence. We were privileged, many of us, to be born here. I feel like we have an obligation.
Oh,
and we're not meeting it.
We are not meeting it. It's interesting that the Pilgrims and the Puritans understood that so much better than we did. Their covenant was to live such a righteous life that God could bring about righteousness through them. And we as Americans need to have that same thing. We see a lot of the things that are sweeping our country right now. The pornography, the lawlessness, the sense of entitlement, all of those things. That's personal unrighteousness. And we need to do all that we can to foster righteousness in our country so that God can pour his Spirit out on us so that we can heal a lot of the problems that we see in our land. Because anyone who's paying the slightest bit of attention to anything knows that we have a lot of problems in our land right now.
We do. One of the programs we have on the air is abuse. Sexual abuse, and it's out of control everywhere. Mm-hmm. And this woman that's on with me, Janice Weinheimer, she was personally sexually abused, not once, but several times as an adolescent. And so she has written a great book about this, and we're going to be talking about it again in the next couple of weeks. 1 out of 3 women girls have been abused by the time they're 18.
Not surprised.
And 1 out of 6 boys. But that's just part of it. There's a lot of mental illness going on and stress. And sometimes I think, when we're busy, we get out of that. We do something worthwhile. And I feel like it's a time that people have to be called to answer for the country that they've been given, called to answer for the freedom that we live with every day, and we take it for granted. I feel like, where do we go first, Pam? And that's a sincere question, because yes, we can go to meetings, and yes, we can go to this, but we need to be talking about millions of people who want to go and don't know where. And by the way, I'm going to answer that question myself. One way to do that is to let your friends know, pat.utahvalleylive.com, because these are the kind of things that we're going to be talking about, sharing. We hope to get you back on with others in the Thomas Jefferson Center and let the people know worldwide. So share that address. We're only one little spot on an internet, so people have to have the address in order to find us. But let me have you now answer it, because is this not the time? Have we not been prepared for this? Why do we keep thinking it's tomorrow?
I don't know why everybody thinks it's tomorrow, because if you turn on the television set and look at the news, it's today. We're in the middle of it right now. This is one of the reasons why I have been so impressed with the seminars that we teach, the 16-week seminar that we're teaching at the Thomas Jefferson Center, which, by the way, is called the Healing of America series. Because in those last two seminars, after we've given you a good foundation for what the Constitution is and what led up to the Constitution, and allowed people to see the inspiration and the power of these men that brought about the Constitution, then we identified those on the other side of the scale who've been trying to tear it down. But that last seminar, we give you some real information about what you can do about this process. And so let me just tell you what Ezra Taft Benson, who is a former Secretary of Agriculture, and also, for those of the LDS faith, was the president and prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He said that there were 4 things that we really needed to do in order to begin to heal our land. And those 4 things are: first, we need to acknowledge God as the source of our freedoms, not the government. The entire mentality that's being brought about today is that the government gives us our freedoms. It does not. Our freedoms are inalienable, and they come from God. The second is righteousness in our home and in our families and as individuals. We need to be working to foster and promote our own righteousness. The third is that we need to become educated. We need to understand the Constitution. We need to read it and study it. We need to ponder what it does in our lives. We need to invest ourselves in the Constitution, which of course is one of the great things that we're doing with these Healing of America seminars.
I was going to ask that. Is that the main focus, is learning about the Constitution?
The Constitution, yes.
Not only where it came from. You mentioned it briefly right at the top, and I want to go back to it, but how it has changed.
Yes, it's changed a great deal.
I want to talk about that, if you can give us some insights into that.
I can do that.
About how it's changed, because there's a tendency to sit and just watch the news and watch the news, and you begin to think, well, they're going to change this a little bit, they're going to add that. And we're thinking of the Constitution as we have known it since our childhood. Mm-hmm. Well, there have been a lot of changes. They have not all been good, but then there were changes before we became aware.
Yes, there were.
And that's where I would like to go a little bit here, because that's all part of this healing, these sessions that you're going to go through.
Indeed.
Because it's a healing of America. I want to insert here just quickly. Around December the 5th to the 8th, we're going to have a young man named Tim Ballard, who's a new author, and he's got 2 books out, and it's called The American Covenant. And he really goes into this. And the general authorities have just really embraced him recently, because he's nailed it. He pulled this together. He's young, he lives in Arizona, but he's going to be in our area between the 5th and the 8th of December. So we're going to get him on the air with us, but we want to fill up a room with about 1,000 people, if at all possible, here in Utah County. He's planning on just going to Salt Lake. I want to get your group involved, meet him, and see what we can do together, because I believe if we come more and more together as a community, it's kind of like a ripple effect. We can make it happen across the country.
It has to start with one or a small group, and that we all tell each other, and we... I'm going to finish just that one last point, because I know there'll be people who are writing down those 4 points.
And I didn't get the 4th
and
one.
that
I got
4th point is that we need to become involved in the process of government beginning at the community level, because if the communities are strong, we can build a strong nation. But if the communities are weak, it's not going to matter a whole lot what we do at the federal level. So yes, we are concerned about what's happening at a federal level, but you make sure that your community is safe.
Let's give those 4 points again.
Okay, they are. Mm-hmm. First of all is to acknowledge God as the source of our freedoms. Secondly, strong and righteous families and individuals and homes. Thirdly, study the Constitution, become aware of it, become aware of what you can do to strengthen it. And fourth, be involved in the process beginning at the community level.
Great. I want you to give, excuse me, Dan's phone number again.
Oh, okay.
So that if anyone wants to get hold of him, and again, we have a chat room. If you're on pat.utahvalleylive.com, please chat with us, comment. We appreciate that. and any questions you might have. So let's give his phone
Okay.
number, get your pen and paper. Let's get this down, and then let's talk just briefly again.
You asked me a question and I didn't answer it, and I already don't remember what
I
the
don't
question
remember
was.
what it was.
Darn it.
We'll go back to it, but
Okay.
I'll think of it in a minute. But I want to get the phone number here and about the meetings
Okay.
that they're having.
Okay, Dan Vance is your contact point for the Thomas Jefferson Center for the any information that you would like to ask, and his telephone number is 801-513-5045. Repeating that again, 801-513-5045. You can contact him personally at Dan, D-A-N, at thomasjeffersoncenter.com. And we have the 16-week Healing of America seminars already in progress. You can step into the middle of those seminars, and it will make perfect sense to you. But those seminars are taking place right now in Lehigh, in Bountiful, and in Layton. And if you wish to register for those seminars, go to thomasjeffersoncenter.com and look for the information on Healing of America. The cost of those seminars, they occur in four-part series, and the cost for each four-part series is $39.
Crazy low price.
Crazy.
I mean, it may never get offered that inexpensively again. And the question was, where did our Constitution? What did it look like originally?
Okay,
Some of
yes.
the things that have happened to it along the way.
Well, there are a lot of things that have happened to it, and this is an interesting, an important point for people to be aware of. We all of us, at least at the Thomas Jefferson Center, and many of us keep yearning to go back to the original Constitution. We need to understand it's going to take some effort to restore that. For instance, when our president and when our members of Congress take an oath, they take an oath to uphold the Constitution, but be aware that that oath requires them to honor the Constitution as it stands today with the changes that have substantially altered it. That's why it's so important that we go back and restore the Constitution to what it originally was, because it is the original formula of the Constitution that was so powerful and that gave us freedom and prosperity and individual liberty.
Pam, where could we find out what those changes are? I mean, and then as an individual, what can you do about it? There's such a, for as wonderful as our state is, the state of Utah, we have a terrible voting record.
Oh, we do.
We don't come out and vote. We say, oh, we're going to be blessed. We're going to be taken care of. Somebody else can do it. It's just one of the lowest turnouts when they're time to select or elect. It's terrible.
Well, a lot
And
of
I
it.
want to see that change. And what can
I
we
do
do?
too.
Can you answer any of these
Yeah,
questions?
right back to the Healing of America seminars, because
Right.
when
Okay.
we say, okay, what changes have come to the Constitution, we lay all of that out in the Healing of America seminars. There have been 25, 26 amendments to the Constitution proposed. A lot of them were not good amendments. The first 10 in the Bill of Rights were very powerful and very needed. The 11th and 12th were good. Beyond that, some of them are good and some of them are not. Let me focus on one that has been particularly damaging. In fact, it has basically changed the nature of what we do in the Constitution, and that's the 17th Amendment. That's an amendment that really needs to be repealed, but let me explain that you repeal an amendment by passing a new one. There's no procedure to repeal, just simply to pass one that cancels it out.
They can't just mark it off.
No, you can't do that. The 17th Amendment altered the way the members of the Senate are selected and made them selected by the vote of the common people as opposed to appointed by the states. Now, the way the Constitution was originally set up, it was set up to be a balance between the states and the individuals. It gave liberty to the individuals, but it also had to honor the states, because the original Constitution, the one that works, gave a lot of power to the states. And the state is actually supposed to be the unit that exercises the greatest power under the Constitution. A strong federal government is always going to lead you to a loss of individual freedoms. But the states remaining powerful, that's where you maintain your individual freedoms.
In a sense, that's your community.
That's your community.
That's
It's small enough that you as a citizen can influence
Right.
it. It can adapt to the needs, the changing needs and the peculiar peculiarities of an individual area. And so you want a strong state. And the way the states were kept strong under the original Constitution is that the states selected the senators. And so a senator going back to Washington, D.C. and sitting in the Senate was there to represent the needs of the states.
And unfortunately, we think that's what's happening now. We do. We believe that it's what should happen.
It's what should happen, but it's not happening at all because you are responsible to the group that sends you into a power position. So if it's the state legislature that sends you into a power position, you're going to answer to the states. So you're going to do what's right for the individual state. But that's what the 17th Amendment changed. The original Constitution provided it. The 17th Amendment changed it and made the senators elected by the common people just as the House of Representatives are. And so now both of them are subject to direction from the people, and nobody's minding the store with the states. Therefore, the states are becoming weak. Their power is being taken away from them. They now receive a substantial portion of their funding from the federal government. And so what we've got to do in order to restore our original Constitution is we've got to go back to making strong states. That's how we will dilute and return to what it should have been, the power of the federal government. Federal government is way too strong, way too powerful. They're controlling everything from transportation to health care to education to
what we eat, where
everything.
we eat it, and what we want to do
with it. Oh my goodness, yes, even what you eat.
I do want to mention that the pharmaceutical firms are hugely influential in what's going on in our country because they are so fabulously wealthy, and also you've got unions,
and they wouldn't have the influence if you didn't have a strong federal government, because otherwise, if you had strong states, you would have 50 individual states. It would be much easier to moderate the influence of those organizations instead of them just being able to go lobby with one entity in Washington, D.C.
It's a little overwhelming. All right, now I just want to get to this point. We've got still about 10 minutes. So, excuse me. We can do some things on a state level. We can run for office. We can get involved in what's going first in our cities and then what's going on in our state and get more and more involved. I think there's a feeling that the elephant is so big we don't know where to start.
Well, it is if you think about tackling the federal government.
Right. But if you stay in the state, even then it's a little overwhelming thinking, well, I don't have the money to run for this or that or the other thing, or I don't have the background or the knowledge. But you won't know if you don't try.
Well, and you don't have to run for office. You need to find out who the good and honorable people are, really thoroughly check through, and then support them. You can support them financially. You can support them through their organizations. You can become part of these organizations that are working toward freedom.
Well, I think that you've done a good start at giving us an overview, that's for sure. Do you have another story? You had a couple.
I just really do want to tell this.
I know you have some other stories you want to share, so let's share them.
I have this story. These are just stories that I've pulled together about what happened during the Revolutionary War and individuals that participated in how the Spirit directed people. There's the story of a man named Sam Whittemore who lived in Massachusetts, and this happened right after the battles of Lexington and Concord. Pat's smiling because she heard the story yesterday. This man was just so cute. He was 80 years old. And after the Battle of Lexington, which was a disaster for the colonists, and then the Battle of Concord, which was much more successful for the Americans because they had some time to organize, the British columns, the British troops began retreating back toward Boston area. And Sam Whittemore lived along the way where all these British redcoats were retreating. And he announced to his wife, I'm going to fight the British, this cute little 80-year-old man. And so he took his complete arsenal, which was one musket, two pistols, and his old saber from a previous war. And he got behind a stone wall about 150 yards from the road where the British troops were going to be coming down. When they started down the road, he started firing at them, and he was a very accurate marksman, and so he was really starting to take out some of these soldiers. And so the commander of this British patrol, this British column, sent some soldiers over to find him, and when they came around the wall and they saw him there, he took out one of them with the musket, and then firing both pistols at the same time, he took out two redcoats with a pistol, and he's just drawing his saber when a ball from one of the British muskets hit him right in the face and knocked him down. He was then bayoneted by these British soldiers until they were sure that he was dead, and then they left him. But Sam Whittemore wasn't dead. He had been bayoneted 14 times and had half of his face blown off. But that sweet man lived from the age of 80 to the age of 96, and to the day he died, he swore if he had a chance, he'd do it all over again. I just love that
tenacity,
story.
absolute tenacity. I will live. I will overcome. That's a great story. You want to tell the one about Patrick Henry?
I really do want to tell this story about Patrick
Okay.
Henry. Patrick Henry was just an amazing individual. He was a fireball. He was a brilliant orator, but he was also a very good lawyer and a very compassionate man. And at this point in time in the history of the Americas, the Baptists were being persecuted. Prior to that time, all Christians had believed only in infant baptism. The Baptists came forward believing in adult baptism, and they were persecuted for quite a while. So they were constantly being hauled into court. And Patrick Henry believed that they should have their religious freedom like everyone else did. So he would go out of his way to help any Baptist that he knew needed legal representation. And in this particular story, he traveled 50 miles out of his way to go represent some Baptists that were being taken through the legal fire. So he had arrived in the community of Spotsylvania, and he strides into the court and asks for a copy of the indictment against these men. And he's standing there holding the indictment in his hand, and he turns with astonishment to the court, and he said, "Did I hear, as an expression of a crime, that these men are charged with," he stops and he peers closely at the indictment, "what? With preaching the gospel of the Son of God?" Lifting his hands toward heaven, he said simply, "Great God." And then he exclaimed, "Great God." And then finally he thundered, lifting his arms to the skies. He says, "Preaching the gospel of the Son of God? Great God." And the prosecutor and the judge were so stunned that they just sat there, and finally, after a minute or two, they dismissed the charges. I thought that was
That's
the
a great
most
story.
wonderful story. Do we have time for me to tell
do.
the one about
We
George
do.
Washington?
Oh, yeah, we've
I
got
want
time.
to end with this story about George Washington. There was a turncoat collaborator named Michael Wildman, who he was an American, but he had been giving information to the British. And he had done a lot of damage to the American troops. And so he was apprehended, tried, and sentenced to be hanged. The night before he was to be hanged, a man by the name of Peter Miller, who was a member of the pacifist German Seventh-day Baptists Ephra cloister, who had been tending the American soldiers who had been injured, arrived at Washington's tent and asked to see him, stating that he had a favor for him. And so Washington asked him what he wanted, and he said, "I've come to ask you to pardon Michael Wildman." And Washington replied, "Impossible in such times as these. We cannot pardon your friend." "Friend," said Peter Miller, "he's no friend of mine. He's my bitterest enemy. He has persecuted me for years and even beaten me and spit in my face, knowing full well that I would not strike back. Michael Wildman is no friend of mine." Washington was puzzled, and he said, "And you still wish me to pardon him?" "I do," said Peter Miller. "I ask it of you as a great personal favor." "Why?" said Washington. And Peter Miller replied, "I asked it because Jesus did as much for me." Washington turned and went into the other part of his tent and returned with a written pardon for Michael Wildman, and as he handed it to Peter Miller, he said to him, "Thank you, my friend, for this." That tells us a lot about the character of George Washington, but also about the spiritual dimension taking place during this great war for independence in the Americas.
I'm afraid if anybody thinks we're going to pull this together without God being involved in it, that
We won't. We
won't.
cannot.
We absolutely won't. It's the basis of everything that we are in this country,
Yes.
everything that we have been, and everything that we're going to be. Pam, if we would, let me thank Hayani, and then if you will get your notes out on the phone numbers and things again. Pam Openshaw has been my guest this morning, and she didn't go on to mention that she's raised, what, 9 children?
Eight.
8 children,
Eight.
and I think half of them are boys or more.
6 boys and 2 girls. Good
So
kids.
she's been blessed and then gone through the ropes also.
And survived.
And survived. and she has been very much a part of our community in every way. We're very grateful to her. We're grateful to the Thomas Jefferson Center. I want to thank the Kyani people for sponsoring us. I love these products. I feel wonderful. They've changed my life. They'll change yours also. And I'd like to give just a second or two to Kent Vorkink and Pete Hansen, who keep us on the air. Kent owns UtahValleyLive.com. And we have just a few seconds if you want to give Dan's phone number.
Yes, I do.
Then we'll go out with that.
This is Dan Vance as the contact point for Thomas Jefferson Center to sign up for the Healing of America seminars. And his telephone number is 801-513-5054. 513-5054, and contact him, Dan, at thomasjeffersoncenter.com.
Thank you, Pam. We appreciate
Thank you.
a great deal.
Loved it.
Be with us again if you're on KHQN. We thank you for being there and listening to us. And if you're out at your desk working away at pat.utahvalleylive.com, join us again tomorrow. No, tomorrow's Saturday. Join us on Monday, Halloween, and dress up and listen to us on the radio and watch us on your computer. Thanks so much. Have a great day.